Hey, how's it going, everybody? I am Jared Johnson, the Jared J. Thank you all so much for joining me again. Today, we are going to be talking about fantasy football. Some of you may play fantasy football. Some of you may never have. Some of you may be thinking about playing. I don't really know. But that's what we're going to be talking about today. Last year, 2023, was my first time ever playing fantasy football. It was a brand new experience for me, and I realized that even though I know the NFL, I didn't know fantasy football, and there was a lot to be learned. My team had a losing record. I think I was 8 wins and 10 losses, but it was tremendously fun. I learned a lot, and I'd like to impart some things that I learned on people who haven't done it before as well. So what I'm going to be talking about today are 5 players that I will not be drafting this year. And I'm not going to be talking about rookie kickers or backup tight ends, people that likely are not going to have much impact on the fantasy world as it is. I'm going to be naming 5 guys that some of you may think, well, hey, they sound like pretty good players, and I was thinking about drafting them. It's okay if you still want to draft these guys. I'm going to tell you who I'm not drafting and why I'm not drafting them. In fact, I've already joined multiple leagues this year. I've created my own league, and we have not drafted yet. I've also joined and drafted in at least 10 more leagues. And these guys I'm naming, I have not drafted and do not plan to change that. So, number 1 guy that I'm not drafting in 2024 is Stefon Diggs, wide receiver now of the Houston Texans. In 2023, he did average 16.1 points per game in a point per reception league. That's actually not too bad. Here's why I'm not drafting Stefon. He went from being the clear-cut number 1 receiver in Buffalo's offense, where he had Josh Allen throwing to him. He got to a point where he just didn't seem very motivated, and so by the end of the year, he wasn't producing. So I'm sure he helped a lot of fantasy managers win some games early on last season, but by the end of the year, he might have cost some of those same managers some fantasy championships with his negligence and with not producing. I'm not taking that risk with him. He also went from being the number 1 receiver in Buffalo to now being the number 2 at best receiver for Houston. Look, Houston's got a lot of great weapons. It's going to be good for the real NFL. But if we're talking individual players for your fantasy team, I'm not interested in drafting Stefon Diggs at all, especially because the leagues I've already drafted in, this guy's still going in the 2nd or 3rd round in most of my leagues. There is no way I would draft him that high. Nico Collins probably is their number 1 receiver. Also, a healthy Tank Dell with a year of experience is very good. All 3 of those guys are likely to have some weeks where they put up 20 or more fantasy points. They're also likely to have some weeks where they barely get you double digits. I'm not going to spend a 2nd or 3rd round pick on a guy that's that inconsistent, especially if I genuinely want a wide receiver in the 2nd or 3rd round. There's so many options available. There's Marvin Harrison Jr., there's Michael Pittman Jr., there's Drake London, there's DK Metcalf. Yeah, Drake London, my producing partner, Chris Black's new personal favorite. That's an inside joke for another time. There's Mike Evans, there's Devontae Adams. There's plenty of guys that are clear-cut number 1 receivers that are going to get more volume and more opportunity that I will draft before Stefon Diggs. I'll be honest, and I like Nico Collins, but I'm not going to draft him that early either. It's simply not worth it when the ball's going to be dispersed as much as it is in that offense. If you're a Texans fan and you just really want a piece of that offense and you want to spend one of your first 3 or 4 picks on one of these guys, my advice is just go ahead and grab C.J. Stroud. He's going to be the one throwing the ball. If you want to spend one of your top few picks, I don't recommend personally drafting a quarterback that early, and I'll talk about that a little more as we go along. If you just really think you have to, take C.J. Stroud in the 3rd or 4th round. Don't waste your time drafting Stefon Diggs. And if you really want to, hey, you do what you want to with your team. I'm out on Stefon Diggs. Number 2 guy I will not be drafting this year is Alvin Kamara, running back for the New Orleans Saints. Now, in 2023, he did average 17.9 points per game in a point per reception league. That's pretty darn impressive. So it may sound like, well, why on earth wouldn't I want to draft him? Here's my reasons. You can agree or disagree. He was horribly inefficient last year. There was a time where he was a very dynamic and very good running back. Those times are past. When I watched him play last year, his yards per carry was under 4 yards per carry. The only way he even was fantasy relevant was he caught a bunch of little screen passes and dump offs and swing passes out of the backfield, because that New Orleans offense basically did one of 2 or 3 things. Derek Carr dropping back and just throwing bombs, deep bombs downfield to Chris Olave, hoping that Olave would win a 50-50 ball, or dumping it off to Kamara, or Derek Carr getting sacked. So yes, Kamara may still catch some dump offs, but he's 29 years old now. They've got a second-year running back by the name of Kendre Miller that may start eating into some of Kamara's productivity. I get that he averaged 17.9 a game last year. He may still get some dump-offs to be relevant, but he also has been going off the board in the 3rd or 4th round. So if I really want a running back in that range, I'm simply not going to settle for someone who's as inefficient as Kamara when I could be drafting Derek Carr, Isaiah Pacheco, Derek Carr. See, I'm still saying him. Derek Henry, Isaiah Pacheco, Josh Jacobs, James Cook, Kenneth Walker III. I'll take any of those guys before I take Alvin Kamara and just hope that he makes a living on some dump-off passes to somehow become fantasy relevant. The 3rd guy I will not be drafting this year is Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver George Pickens. Now, I'm going to contradict myself a little bit, but then I'm going to circle back around and explain my reasons. Pickens in 2023 did average 12.3 fantasy points per game in a PPR league. That's not great, but it's not bad. There are some signs that point to him having a much bigger season this year. Number 1, Deontay Johnson is now with the Carolina Panthers, making Pickens almost definitely the true number one undisputed receiver in Pittsburgh. That volume alone should raise his fantasy points per game. Also, last year, he played with one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. Now, let me just be clear. I've got nothing personal against Kenny Pickett. I don't know the guy as a person. All I'm saying is he might be better suited being an assistant shift manager at a Baskin-Robbins than he is playing quarterback in the National Football League. They now have Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, and I don't care which one of those guys starts. That is a massive upgrade over someone dipping strawberry ice cream into a cone. So all signs point to George Pickens having a breakout year. There's one major factor as to why I just don't feel comfortable drafting him, and that factor is named Arthur Smith. He is now the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive coordinator. He was the Atlanta Falcons head coach last year. I saw how dysfunctional that offense was. I saw a phenomenal running back by the name of Bijan Robinson not being utilized the way that he should be on week-to-week basis. And I just don't know what Arthur Smith is going to do. Yes, Kenny Pickens is a good receiver. He's primed for a breakout opportunity. But just like I said, Kenny Pickett might be better off somewhere else. Nothing against Arthur Smith as a person either. I just think he might be better being a shift manager at a FedEx Kinko's than he is being an offensive coordinator in the NFL. I just am not confident in the guy. And Pickens has been getting drafted somewhere between rounds 7 and 10. There's a lot of other good receivers that I'll talk about in a different episode that play for teams who don't have an offensive coordinator named Arthur Smith that I would rather roll the dice with. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you some bonus players talking about Pittsburgh. I'm staying away from that whole offense. Jaylen Warren, Najee Harris, both very good running backs. Again, they've been going somewhere in rounds 7 through 11. I'm going to do another episode of running backs I'd rather draft in that range. I just don't know what their season's going to look like. I don't know what Arthur Smith is going to do. For those reasons, I'm out on that whole team. The number 4 guy that I will not be drafting in fantasy football this year is New York Jets wide receiver Garrett Wilson. Last season, I drafted Garrett Wilson in the 3rd round. I took him with my 3rd pick. I took a quarterback in the 1st round, which I'll talk about at a different time. And then I took Nick Chubb as my 2nd pick. So then I thought, well, let me go ahead and get a receiver. That's not the best strategy. Again, I've learned a lot since then. You just want to go with the best players early on. It doesn't have to be quarterback, running back, receiver. You just want to build a great team. I really wanted A.J. Brown with my 3rd pick. I was watching the board. The guy that picked right before me took A.J. Brown. I saw Amon-Ra St. Brown still on the board. I saw Keenan Allen still on the board. I saw DK Metcalf still on the board. I made the intentional decision to draft Garrett Wilson because I genuinely believed that's my next best option now that A.J. Brown has just been taken. Garrett Wilson, as a rookie, had over 1,100 yards receiving. He was Offensive Rookie of the Year in the NFL. He now has Aaron Rodgers. I saw the way Davante Adams performed as Aaron Rodgers' number 1 receiver all those years in Green Bay, and I thought, hey, young, athletic Garrett Wilson, he's now got Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, let me draft him. He's liable to have a huge season. Well, in case you somehow did not know, Aaron Rodgers was injured on the 4th snap of the season last year and missed the whole rest of the year. Garrett Wilson's season was then completely derailed because he then played with a carousel of quarterbacks who, yes, would probably all be better operating carousels for a traveling circus. He still somehow managed 95 receptions, over 1,000 yards, but he only scored 3 touchdowns. He averaged 12.5 points per game. That's not what I wanted out of my 3rd overall pick. So Garrett Wilson is a very good receiver. I believe one day if he plays with a stable, really good quarterback, he's gonna put up some very good years. He's somehow had 1,000 yards each of his first 2 years playing with some horrible quarterbacks. Now, Aaron Rodgers has recovered. He's projected to be the Jets starter. So you may be thinking, well, okay, Jared, for all the reasons you drafted him last year, why wouldn't you draft Garrett Wilson this year? Aaron Rodgers is a year older. He's coming off the worst injury of his career. He's now 40 years old. I just don't know if the Aaron Rodgers we see this year is going to be the Aaron Rodgers that we've seen in years past. Also, the Jets have done nothing to convince me that if Rodgers goes down with another season-ending injury, that they have another quarterback that can step up and actually sustain Garrett Wilson with the type of volume that will make him worth drafting. He's been getting drafted in the 2nd or 3rd round of all the leagues I've been in. I'm simply not going to spend a 2nd or 3rd round pick hoping that Aaron Rodgers stays healthy for a year and plays up to his potential in order to sustain Garrett Wilson. Again, if you're in a league with me or if you're in a league anywhere else and you want to draft Garrett Wilson, go right ahead. You don't have to worry about me taking him because that's not going to happen. And the 5th player that I will not be drafting in 2024 is Kansas City Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes, much to the dismay of my producing partner, Chris Black, who is a Kansas City Chiefs fan. And let me be clear, I do really like Patrick Mahomes. I think he's a very good quarterback. I hope he has a great year in the NFL because I'm actually a fan of him in the NFL. I think he's a great quarterback. He was my number 1 pick last year. I had the number 3 overall pick. I took Mahomes in the 1st round. Didn't know much about fantasy, really didn't know anything about it, but I know the guy's an amazing quarterback. If I were a head coach or an owner in the league, I would be ecstatic for him to be my quarterback. I took him in the 1st round, and then he had a very disappointing season by his standards. He still wasn't that bad. Problem is, he had a bunch of receivers that looked like they were being paid to drop passes. He averaged 17.5 points per game on the season, which is not terrible, but when you take him with the 3rd overall pick, I expected a lot more than that. I think you got to draft somebody in the first round that you believe can get you 20 points or more on a pretty regular basis. That's what I expected of Mahomes. He did not deliver it. Not necessarily all his fault, but it really was frustrating to me and helped to derail my season. When Mahomes had receivers dropping passes, my number 2 pick, Nick Chubb, was injured in week 2. Garrett Wilson's quarterback was injured in week 3. My season went downhill pretty fast. So I hope Mahomes has a great season in real life this year. He will probably bounce back. It's not a bad idea to draft him. I'm not really warning people against drafting Mahomes. I'm just not going to do it because another thing I learned in a strategy I've been using more this year is you can get some really good quarterbacks in the later rounds. So when I took Mahomes at number 3 last year, only Justin Jefferson and Christian McCaffrey had been drafted. I passed on Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb and took Mahomes. Both those guys averaged 23 points per game last year in PPR format. I regretted all season not taking one of them because that's 6 more points per game I could have been getting for my team. I also last year in the 7th round drafted Kirk Cousins, even though I didn't need another great quarterback. He was on the board. I'm a big fan of Kirk Cousins, so I took him in the 7th round. He averaged 18 points per game. I could have drafted Tyreek or CeeDee Lamb in the 1st round, waited and gotten Kirk Cousins in the 7th round, and had a better team. Because I couldn't put Mahomes and Cousins on the field at the same time. It did me no good to have a quarterback on the bench that was putting up better points than my number 1 pick was. So for all those reasons, I'm not drafting Mahomes because the leagues I've been drafting in this year, he's going within the first 4 rounds. Simply not a strategy I'm willing to employ. I'm going to wait till at least round 7, round 6 at the very earliest before I even start thinking about drafting a quarterback. So for those reasons, in regard to Patrick Mahomes, I'm out. If you want to draft him within your first few rounds, if you really think you need a quarterback that early, go ahead. It's not necessarily a bad strategy. It's just not one that I'm going to employ for this season. All right, so there's the 5 guys I'm not going to be drafting. Oh, and there's one more. Jacksonville Jaguars wide receiver, Gabe Davis. And if I have to explain to you why I'm not drafting Gabe Davis, then you're probably not ready for fantasy football. Maybe check with Kenny Pickett to see if Baskin-Robbins is hiring. Those are the 5 guys I'm not going to be drafting this year. If you liked the video, please like the video. If you haven't already done so, subscribe to the channel. It will help me to be able to continue to bring you more of this type of content. Thank you all so much for stopping by. I am Jared Johnson, the Jared J. Hope y'all have a great week, and I hope I see you again real soon. Happy drafting.